Salesforce topics. So tonight, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to go through some awesome topics around productivity with Cobey, and he has some, I'm not going to spoil, but he has some awesome stuff around Notion and how to utilize that better for being a little bit more productive as a Salesforce admin when it comes to just maintaining your time, organizing yourself a little bit better, knowing the ins and outs of like what you could do to improve, I guess, your productivity in your day-to-day life as an admin. And we're also going to go through who he is, how he fits into the Salesforce community, and really what got him to this point as far as his journey is involved so far. So without further ado, I'm going to let Cobey kind of introduce himself. Cobey, you want to just give us like a quick rundown, introduction of who you are, how you fit into the Salesforce world, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jordan. Yeah. So obviously, my name's Cobey Maynard. I am a solution architect and senior delivery principal at a top-tier consulting firm called Slalom. If you've never heard of us, we are now ranked number 3 in the world for Salesforce partnerships, which is really awesome to see. I lead some of our largest big, public sector projects, typically in the range between $10 and $100 billion in revenue. And so, yeah, that's currently where I sit today. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem since essentially 2018, where I was recruited right out of college after the military to solve some business problems for a software startup that's built on the ServiceNow platform. And that's whenever I realized that Salesforce was a really awesome way to solve business problems, and sort of dove headfirst there. So it's been a fun ride. And I really enjoy now everything Salesforce. I am a big Salesforce advocate. My mission in life is to turn admins into architects. And that's pretty much what I'm doing here today.
That's awesome. Really awesome that you're sitting over at Slalom in the position you're in. Also heard that you came from military first. So was this something that kind of lined up educational wise when you were in the military? Like, were you going down kind of the tech development route, or it was just completely random afterwards? You just found Salesforce and you're like, I love it.
Yeah, so this is a crazy story. I have people that tell me I should give talks on this all the time, but the reality is I've been building computers since I was 11. I've loved technology pretty much since I was, since I can remember. I joined the military because I was looking for a place to sort of kick myself into gear. I was really good at my job in the Marine Corps. And so I essentially turned into sort of like a Marine Corps consultant, where I traveled and taught a whole bunch of people on how to do the job that I was hired to do. That sort of led me down this route of like, okay, I think I'm getting good at business. And then that's when I got out to go to business school. And that's where like the intersect of business and technology merged for me. And that's ultimately how I landed here.
That's sweet. Yeah, it's always a cool story to hear, but then 2, kind of taking some of those transferable skills is what we talk a lot about in this group of what am I doing now? How does that relate to something that I could kind of pivot into or transition into another section of where I'm going with my career? So super awesome that you already had that. And then obviously a ton of leadership, and I'm sure communication stuff that you already had, like being in the Marine Corps. I'm sure that's a huge high level thing that you got to be good at. So awesome to hear that part of it. After you got out of the Marine Corps, where was like the first part of Salesforce that you got into? Because obviously you're at Slalom now. Did you start off consulting, or where were you in the beginning stages?
Yeah, so I went to school at Rutgers, and I did a major in information technology and informatics. And I was at a startup contest for the school, and essentially we built a whole product and whatnot. I got recruited directly out of that pitch contest by a venture-backed software startup, where I was then kind of given this whole mission of building out a global operations team. They had already had Salesforce at that time. I didn't know what it was, but I have a background in database administration, so I kind of picked it up pretty quickly. And my ultimate goal, or I would say the reason that I was brought in, was to implement a very large scale enterprise solution called Financial Force PSA. So if you've ever worked with Financial Force PSA, it's essentially like a professional services tool. We did that, and I was given a 6-month timeline from June to January 1st to go live. We went live in October, and we're able to identify $750,000 in unbilled services because of the data migration and obviously all of the additional insights that you get from moving on to the Salesforce platform. That's when I knew. I was like, all right, but we've got something here. And then I was at Nuvola for another 3 years or so, and I got recruited out of there to a smaller consulting agency called MTX, who's on the rise right now. So, shout out to them. It's a great, awesome company to work for. But I was put in a position where I wasn't really sure if I was going to succeed at the moment. And essentially I was a technical lead for a very large public sector entity, one of the biggest cities in the country. And I strived, and it was a lot of fun. I met some phenomenal people. I had some absolutely phenomenal leaders who ultimately led me to where I am today.
Nice. I appreciate you rocking us through a little bit of like your resume stuff. I know it's not always the most fun thing to talk about when you're going through some of that, because I feel like we have to explain it all the time, but really appreciate it. Just give us some context where you're at, where you're coming from. So for tonight's specific session, we kind of now have a little bit more foundation of who you are, how you got here, how you fit in, some of the awesome things that you had happen before Salesforce. So at this point, I wanted to kind of give you some time to introduce a little bit more of our topic. I know we want to go over specifically, you have some awesome stuff going on with Notion. So walk us through a little bit of that, how you came up with this idea, and then let's kind of just go through that together of like, why Notion, what does it do for us, why it's made your life easier in the Salesforce world, and why it would be applicable to this group.
Yeah, so I actually want to like step back a little bit, right? Because Notion is a tool at the end of the day, and it's a tool to solve problems. But there's a problem statement specifically around where I sat whenever I was working at that venture-backed software startup. And it was the fact that I had so much that I needed to manage at the same time personally. The knowledge management, task management, project management, managing data, managing the financials. Like there was just so many things that we needed to do. And being a scrappy software startup, right? You don't have access to a lot of the enterprise tools that teams use. And I've been a big productivity individual anyway, so sort of dabbling in the ecosystem and being around the different tools that solve sort of the productivity problems, specifically Notion. That's kind of where I really started to adopt it. So I brought in Notion to really solve that first, the knowledge management piece for me. So how do I store notes? How do I, retrieve notes? Typically, I was just kind of taking anything that I needed to document and I was storing it in, an Evernote, or I was storing it in OneNote, and I never had any consistency. So it ultimately just ended up being like this black hole of knowledge that I never could really leverage, which was a problem, right? It's like, why am I taking all of these notes? And then the same thing is like, I realized we started to have too many tools for task management and project management and a whole bunch of other things. And Notion kind of solved all that because I could centralize all of those tasks or all of those functions into one system, right? Then that's whenever I would say the architect side of me kind of kicked into gear. And it was like, okay, this is really awesome. How can I design things to be more efficient in my workflows, right? What kind of Notion has this concept of templates. So what kind of templates can I create that pretty much remove the repetitive tasks that I do on a day-to-day basis? And that's really where the adoption kicked in. I really started to enjoy it at that time. So that was 2018, and I've been using it ever since.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and like you have the call out already, I think that's like a really natural progression that we all kind of go through, right? Which is get into Salesforce. First thing is usually just like figuring it out. So what's the foundation here? How do I fit in? What do I like? What do I not like? And initially you don't know anything. So it's a lot of like picking and choosing. Do I like the development? Do I like the designing? Do I like solution architect, right? So I definitely love that part of it about it, where you're kind of calling that out of saying, okay, hey, I went through this first, utilizing just like what I was trying to get good at, quickly realized I love the design piece of it. Obviously a natural progression towards getting into architecture and how you can design things to be a little more efficient. And then obviously using another tool, Notion, to kind of leverage that against what you're already doing to make that a little bit easier. So right now you have within like Notion, so you've used it, obviously you get really familiar with it. Now at this point you have more or less like a product that you're trying to sell towards people, right? Like a doc that we can get access to that has a bunch of layouts and templates for an admin to use. Walk us through that piece of it. What does that all consist of? And if it's easier too, if you want to share your screen, you definitely can, and we can kind of look at that together if that's easier for you as we go through that.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the great things is like realistically, and whether, people start to look at my templates or other templates on the ecosystem, right? Notion is really a platform. It's an application development platform is what I call it. And that tends to scare people away from it because it sounds complex. But in reality, it's not. It's the easiest way to build solutions that solve your problems. And they've got a lot of phenomenal material to learn the product, and it's very easy to mold. And what's really been cool is that I have been able to get a lot of other teams to sort of adopt Notion just due to its ease of, its ease of use and its ease of adoption and the ability to sort of build things out very rapidly and make small changes. And so, yes, I have ultimately built templates that kind of are, and templates that are for individuals. I have team templates that are a little bit more extreme and complex that are designed to centralize the technological infrastructure that most organizations use. But we can walk through one of my Salesforce professional template today.
Okay, that'd be awesome.
Can you throw me the option to share my screen, sir?
Yeah, let me hear you change this here. Multiple. Make sure.
Open system settings. I gotta love this one. All right. Zoom turned on. Cool. All right, give me 2 seconds. I got to jump back in because it's going to ask me for system settings and enabling that. So I'll be right back.
Okay, no worries at all. Appreciate it.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear you good?
All right, sweet. Okay, so this is Notion. And this is a system or a tool, like I said earlier, that is pretty much moldable however you want to use it. I started really using Notion to solve or store my notes for certifications, believe it or not, right? So I wanted to take all my certification notes and put them into a system that I could ultimately leverage as I continued to go grow in my career. We have all these great notes on things like the order of execution and the different ways objects can be leveraged or lookup relationships, all the really detailed things that people or admins and I would say young Salesforce professionals sort of nerd over.
Yeah.
But putting it into a tool that you can leverage every single day is really, really beneficial. So even today, when I'm on projects, a lot of the times, like if it's an Experience Cloud project or a project that includes Experience Cloud or a project that includes Service Cloud, I will directly link to my certification notes and I reference them all the time. So that's really why I started it. And so you'll see here this is overall the professional bundle template that I use, and it encompasses a whole bunch of things, right? To include those certification notes. This is what a real-time certification note looks like, right? Right now I'm writing out a study guide for public sector solutions. And what's really awesome is that this is really just a series of pages. So this is the overall certification page. I have my template will give you I would say the infrastructure or the template for exam guides and information, resources and files. And then ultimately, if I wanted to add a new note section, I could click this button, but this is what a note section would look like. On the right-hand side, you've got your table of contents. I have a distillation feature, and this is kind of a methodology that I can talk about here in a little bit. But this is kind of where you get really into it, and I can zoom in here. But looking at certifications and being able to really, really, I'm sorry, but this is the type of stuff that I'll eventually really nerd out about, and we can have other sessions specifically on certification and learning methodologies and frameworks. But this is really built around some of those ways to streamline the ability to not only encapsulate knowledge and learn it, but then be able to reference it over time. There's a great quote that I know that says, "Your brain is for having ideas, not storing them." And so this is the idea, what they call the second brain, right? So the ability to store things into a system that is immediately referenceable. Another really great thing about Notion is that you have this global search function here. So if you ever did want to recall something, so whether it's recalling, order, like again, order of execution or whatever, you can just go in here, type in a global search function, and then it'll show you all the notes that has that information on it. That's a big aspect of having a second brain or having this information in a system that's immediately recallable, right? Going back to the professional template. So this is, as you talked about, right, the product that I've sort of put together over time to sell. In reality, I built this for myself. And this is sort of the the culmination of 4 years worth of tweaking and perfecting and growing into the platform. So this is an all-in-one tool for Salesforce professionals specifically, because that's the reason that I built it, to manage projects, resources, to be able to store notes, whether it's text notes, whether it's links to specific things, whether it's bookmarking things, right? Centralizing all of that into one system, meeting notes, tracking all your certifications, and Salesforce documentation. So if you're an admin and you're working on a specific, within a company, right, you can actually bring to the table the ability to store and manage your Salesforce documentation in here. I've included out of the box data dictionaries. So if you take a look at this is sort of your standard data dictionary. And there's a whole bunch of information around here, right? So I have data dictionary how-tos and whatnot. And I would be happy to go into technical documentation as a best practice. This is something I'm very passionate about bringing to the table, to the Salesforce ecosystem going forward, right? So you also have ERDs, system landscapes. I provide a whole lot of information and links here from like a technical documentation perspective, and FAQs. So the great thing about this is that I've created your sort of home dashboard. This is your landing page. And this is where I live day in and day out, right? I have my projects on the left. I also have certifications here. I have included some certification stuff too as well. But I have my projects, so you can track your projects real time. You can track your certifications real time. You have your tasks as well. A board, you can do a weekly view of your tasks. It shows you a week's calendar view. I have tasks that you can sort of list for today, right? As you can see, this task is a due date that's within today. And then I also have an inbox where it's just where I can just dump a whole bunch of tasks. So if I know that I have a bunch of stuff that I need to do, I can just kind of throw them all here and organize them later, right? Have your notepad, which is sort of like a copy and paste place. So that way, because we all have that time where we're like, we need to copy something, but we don't want to store it into like a file or whatever. So this is really what that notepad is for. I have a lot of really cool things. And with Notion, they have this feature called Notion AI, where I can actually go through and have AI, much like GPT-4 and all this other stuff, do things for me directly within Notion. Now that does require a paid plan on some features, but one of the really cool things is like Notion will summarize your pages for you. So like if you have your certification notes, you can do like distilled summarizations with Notion AI. It's absolutely insane, but that is a paid feature. I just want to be realistic about that. And then the real awesome thing about this is the resources and areas, right? So this template is built off of the PARA framework or the PARA framework. And if you don't know what that means, it essentially is a way to organize your digital life, right? It stands for projects, areas, resources, and archives. So when we go here, you're going to see projects, areas, resources, and archives directly here, right? So a project is simply a collection of resources or tasks that has an end date or that is constrained within dates. And so think about like a Salesforce project or a project at your house where you're like, I know, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We have a trip that we're going on or something like that, right? A project is simply just a culmination of those things that have dates. An area is an area of your life that really doesn't have a date. So I have Salesforce as an area, and this is included in the template as well. But this is an area within Notion for me to store everything associated to Salesforce that I want to store. So on the left-hand side, you see I have a link to your Salesforce docs. On the right, I have your resource packets. I'll go over that here in a little bit. And your certification links all directly in Salesforce. So you could favorite this, and then that way you always have one place to go. If you ever want to store or you find something, you come across something within the Salesforce ecosystem that you think is really cool or that you want to reference later, you'll have an area Salesforce record to store that information on. So I've included things like interesting articles, some of my favorite tools, right? So if you want to take a look at Inspector, here's the link, here's the GitHub repo. If you really want to do some nerd out research, you can do that. I have some exam vouchers. I cannot tell you if these are active or not. So, that's my future looking statement, my safe harbor, right? Please make all your purchasing decisions on currently accessible, generally available material, right? Then I have some CTA scenarios if you're looking at becoming an architect. On the left-hand side, this is something that as a consultant, I reference all the time, right? So I have your Salesforce support mechanisms, trust, sales status, so that if I'm having connectivity issues or issues with a specific instance, I can check the status of those instances to see known issues, dev documentation. So this is being able to link to release notes, SOQL and SOSL. So if I'm looking up specific ways to query things, right? Advanced formula links. So if you're really wanting to get advanced formulas, they have some really awesome examples in there, by the way, just throwing that out there. I also have architect documentation. So this is really the architect.salesforce.com, which has a really great, it's a really great knowledge base for learning which approach you should take in a design, right? So if you're looking to design system automation, it'll go through and break down the comparisons of flows versus Apex versus, other alternatives within the platform. Really, really awesome stuff. I also have links to the communities. So Discord community is in there. If you don't know what the Discord community, I absolutely recommend getting on there because it is what I call the Salesforce Underground, and a lot of phenomenal information comes directly from the Salesforce Underground, as well as some other content and tools. So unofficial Salesforce, I have some process mapping, documentation stuff there. So if you really want to nerd out about like advanced process mapping, Apex Sandbox is a place to practice Apex real time within your browser. They give you like sort of challenges to do that you can sort of tackle. And then there's an Apex Hours playlist. So this is pretty much what my Salesforce record looks like. This is how I store all of my information. All right, so that's areas. And then you have your resources. So your resource is kind of like a note, right? So it could be what I call a document that, where you take notes that's either related to a project. It could be, project note, or it could be just an area note or a general note. I've included a couple here that I use every day. And I have like these cheat sheets. So SOQL and SOSL cheat sheets. So I've included the basics here, and you'll see a table of contents, some resources. This one is the query optimization cheat sheet resource that you can get directly here. And what's really awesome is that you can store code blocks. And so if I find myself using Inspector, for example, and querying the same thing over and over, I'll generally store it here. So that way I don't ever have to remember how to write that query. I'll just go to my cheat sheet, copy and paste it, and then I can leverage it on a day-to-day basis, right? The real power, though, for me is the projects. And I have two different project templates that you'll find. So if you're a Salesforce consultant, this is really awesome because I have a pursuit template or opportunity template. This is essentially how to track a Salesforce project through the opportunity lifecycle. But the real power is the delivery template. So as you'll see here, this is a delivery example record. And this is what a project would look like. Right. So I have your overview of the project with your success criteria, keeping it front and center so that every time I go to the project, I know exactly what I'm trying to do. There's a timeline there, as well as on the left-hand side, you have some out-of-the-box features, a client dashboard. So if, again, you're a consultant and you're working through that, you can leverage your client dashboard, give them access, and they have real-time visibility into their tracking and the stories, tasks, timelines, etc. Key resources. So if you want to look at key resources, this is sort of where you would list out all the key resources on the project. Meeting notes, and I nerd out about this all the time. One of my favorite things is the stand-up notes feature. So every project has their own stand-up notes, and all you have to do is click this button for a new day, and it lists out your agenda, and you can track all your blockers and all your tasks directly here without leaving the page, and you have a running list of all your stand-up notes. I use it for my teams all the time. And it's really, really awesome. Again, this goes back to that, how can I templatize things that I do every day to really streamline my process, as well as this gives me documentation. I can just, if I need to add a task, I just add a task up here. If I need to move a task, I can move a task. If I want to list blockers, I can see the blockers from the past 7 days, 10 days, etc. On the left-hand side, I have these are text blocks, but essentially this is like some of the documentation that you would store in a project. If you're working internally as an admin and you're working on like a project to build some sort of feature for your teams, this is also a great way to do it because you can store things like design diagrams or discovery information. So to say you're talking to those team stakeholders and saying, what are you really looking for? How do you foresee this being leveraged in the future? All of those types of things. You can store all that information directly within this project. And then also there's some specific notes here. So say that this was an internal project, you could have things like I'm building out a territory map. Here's my notes. Here's my current state. Here's my future state. Here's my flow ideas. And then obviously those have very, templatized versions. This is sort of how all my notes templates will look. You have a distillation at the top, you'll have your table of contents on the right, and this is out of the box. And then your details you'll fill in. If you want to create a new note, you just simply click this new note button at the bottom. And then that would essentially create a new note and say, now I'm going to talk about, executive stakeholders or something along those lines. And then, of course, your Kanban task board. So this is the ability to create and manage your tasks directly within your project. You have your table, you have your Gantt, and you have your calendar view. So you can see what tasks are due this month, this week. You can pretty much manage it this way. As a consultant managing teams, this becomes extremely powerful because then I can see when tasks are due, when releases are established, when, what the timeline is for each story and all of that. I could go on for days. This whole template, right? So everything that you see here, projects, areas, the resources, archives is an area or is a place for you to sort of store all of your documentation that you really don't use over time, right? This helps declutter your daily or your active work. You have meeting notes, the certification tracker, like I showed you, is here. So for example, this is sort of what you would see in your certification tracker, right? I have included some of the exam information, your Salesforce fundamentals, and then again, your notes, right? Salesforce fundamentals, etc. So this is essentially what it would look like. And I'm happy to answer any questions on this if anybody has them. But yeah,
I think my first thought after watching that incredibly detailed demo there is that I think anybody could just go and create this. I think it's just like, we don't need to really buy this template because, like what you're saying, this only took you 4 years. It was insanely detailed.
yeah,
it's not. So yeah, I mean, anybody in Salesforce trying to do something like this, dang, that's a lot of researches went into this, a lot of tweaking, I could tell, a lot of thought process. So, I mean, this thing, I don't know how somebody would actually duplicate that. That is crazy how much thought you've put into this.
This seems harder than like the admin exam.
It's harder than the certifications we got to take.
It's funny, right? I tell people all the time, the time it would take you to sort of really walk through one feature of this, which is the documentation, the time it would take you to build out this data dictionary, it would, if you paid yourself $50 an hour, it would cost you less just to buy this whole template than it would to build this. Because it's taken me a long time to build these things out. But yeah.
For sure. That's
incredible.
Kind of with what I was going with there. It's just like insanely detailed. Like, you first started, I'm like, okay, yeah. Like, I was like kind of thinking probably what's happened. I'm sure when you've showed this to other people's, like, first thought, like on the first maybe couple you clicked into, I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe you could get something like ClickUp, or maybe you could get something like a, project management. And then it just kept going and going and going. And I was like, okay, wait, there's like nothing out there that would replicate all of this all in one spot. I think for me personally, I really liked the section that you had that was available for just a ton of your like note taking, where you had like, because one thing I'm horrible at, and I was just like thinking as you were talking through that is, you'll look up a really cool solution, you'll look up like a really cool SOQL or a really cool formula or whatever it is, right? Or you'll find something, and it sounds like you've definitely had the same experience where you do all this Googling and you almost find something where it's like, dang, like, how did I even find this random website that has awesome stuff for this specific like custom solution I want? I've come across a few of those websites like that. And then like today, if you were to ask me what those, probably, I don't know how I would find them again because I didn't really write them down. I like knew them at the time, they're gone. So I loved that because I was thinking through that myself, where it's like almost every single day I'm on Google, like Googling something to verify what I'm about to do, or just to like check myself on something. And I'm sure I waste a ton of my time not being super efficient with that, because every day, even if it's something I know, I don't remember exactly detailed, like word for word how to do it. So I'm like, oh yeah, there was that website. Okay, like let me Google a few things. Oh, there it is. Okay, let me reread this. Very rarely myself do I bookmark something where I'm like, okay, I'm going to use this all the time. There's only like one bookmark I have, and it's for like naming conventions. It's like that I use all the time, and I go to that every time on Apex hours. But outside of that, it's like almost like every time that I have to like re-Google something. So personally, this was like one of my favorites right here, because I was thinking through it from like my own personal needs. Like, dang, this would be super, super helpful for myself. just so that I could store all this. Another thing I want to really quickly riff off on this same section was in our community here, a lot of us are brand new. We're just transitioning from a different career into this one. And so another side of this is like, we talk a lot about like marketing ourselves and getting ourselves out there and portfolios. I was looking at this for you and I was like, man, like this alone would just be like a gold mine for content for days, because you would just be like, cool, found this website. I could just take, a whole week and talk about this website and things I found on here that were helpful. And that's a week, 2 weeks, a month's worth of posts right there. Right.
Yeah.
So it's just like that too, on top of just being a really helpful tool. I was like, man, just marketing ways specifically for this group, like putting yourself out there and feeling like you're in like a fog of like, what do I post about? Man, just refer back to this. Like you'd have everything you need to be able to like talk about it and put yourself in a credible position. So those were some of my favorites personally. Honestly, though, all of it was awesome. I mean, favorite as in like already on top of something amazing. Because you have like your projects. I liked that you talked about, you had some templates for like consulting work, caught my eye, because that's obviously what I'm doing right now. Kind of walking you through that. I know you mentioned a little bit when you talked about that template for consulting, maybe we could talk a little bit more about that one. Is when you were talking about like your opportunity life cycle, is that more, hey, I think I found a job and this is make me going through the works of trying to land that client? Or is it just kind of going through and working with that client and this is what we're working on for the week?
Yeah. So for my role, right, my role as a delivery principal, I do a lot of pre-sales work for large engagements. And I needed a way to track my opportunity notes and tasks, like what I do to support an engagement, much like I do for my actual the delivery projects. And so it looks and feels just like a delivery project. So this is the actual template here for pursuits, but it doesn't have like a lot of, it's not going to have your stand-up notes section on there because it's not applicable. It's going to have things like key resources and external meeting notes, as well as some of like your typical documentation that you would see or ask for or sort of track during an engagement, like your pitch deck, your file folder, like if you have a customer file folder where you and the team are collaborating on things. I typically link to these because depending on your company, you may not want to store some of that information in your personal Notion database, like a non-disclosure agreement if you have a master services agreement there as well, because I do a lot of supporting like existing client work. I had mentioned like the certification pieces to it, right? So on this one, I actually have, and I'd probably, this is the demo, so it's not a big deal, but I have like Experience Cloud Consultant. So this is an example where like I would be working with, on a pursuit with Experience Cloud. And I need to refer back to something like licensed models for Experience Cloud, which we all know are sort of all over the place, right? So this is, you'd simply come in here and you just look up slash, not slash, I'm sorry. There you go. Do the 2 brackets, and then you could type in Experience Cloud and you could link your Experience Cloud certification there, right? And there you go. That just like makes it to where now every time that you're working on this pursuit, that information that you actually took from your Experience Cloud certification is directly there. What's really cool is, before I do that, going to my Experience Cloud certification exam, as you can see here, right? Sharing visibility and licensing. Now I know I can go through and look at all of my visibility and licensing, data models, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And that, it's just the efficiency really is like, if I'm on a call with a client and we're working through and they're like, hey, what are license considerations? Like, what should we look at there? I never have to be like, oh, I'll get back to you. I can almost always pull it up real time and give them, it makes me sound like a robot sometimes because it's like I can repeat everything that's directly within my notes. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's super slick. Like you said, too, just like having it all at your fingertips like that and not having to worry so much about rummaging around to go find a lot of this information. Because I think like myself, even just on that one little note, it's like I am using multiple platforms right now. So it's like I have, I don't know, like workspace.fiverr for like a lot of like my NDAs and contracts and time tracking and like what's going on with each client. And then I have like ClickUp, and that's like my project management. What am I doing this week? And what do I need to get set up for like my assistant and like, what do I need to get set up for the community this week? And then it's like, obviously, then you have just like all your stuff for like your passwords. So it's like LastPass or Bitwarden or whatever it is that you choose to use. And the list just like continues to like add on and add on and add on. And you even called this out earlier too. It's like, even with like the new addition to AI, where they're like backpacking on like ChatGPT stuff now in Notion, that just makes it a little bit easier to cut down on some more tools too. Because specifically, if you're like an admin in our community, where you're going to be doing a mix of, yes, I got to learn the work and this is awesome, be organized, but at the same time, like I need to kind of put myself out there, get a portfolio together. I need to have content. Like, again, that takes out some of those other tools that we've recommended in the past, to just kind of all encompass it into one spot, one place where you can live. I think that's what's really the unbeatable piece of this is it's like, there's just so much little things here or there where it can replace a tool here, it can replace a tool there, take back whatever, 16, 20 bucks for a subscription per month on that or this, that it just makes it pretty unbeatable that way, where it's just like, man, what would you rather do? Would you rather have 5 logins, 10 logins, or would you rather just have one spot to go for all this kind of stuff?
And even then, I'll tell you, Notion has a phenomenal free tier. Like their free tier is, now you're not going to use a template that's like this, I would say, in depth, because their free tier is limited by sort of like page linking and you know, the depth of how many pages you have. But if you're just starting out and you want to try Notion out, get their free tier. It's phenomenal. And even so, I pay $4 a month for Notion. Like you can't beat that. Literally $4 a month.
Yeah. There's like I don't even know if I have a subscription that's $4 a month or less. That's
exactly
really cheap, like you're saying. Okay.
Yeah. And to be honest, right, the real reason that I'm pushing sort of like these templates, and I call it the framework of working, but the biggest reason is because the most successful professionals, the most successful architects that I've ever worked with, they just simply have a system in how they work. And it doesn't matter whether it's Notion or whatever. They know exactly where to go to when they're creating a note. They know exactly where to go to when they're sort of taking notes for meetings. They know exactly where to go to when they're, you know, writing something for a project or they're tracking projects. Like they don't have to think about there's no mental brain power wasted on how to do business. They just do business. And that's really what I was shooting for.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the other side too, outside of business and Salesforce, is just in general, like, how do I get better at just life, like just life lessons? Is I would say it's that same principle. Like anybody successful that I've rubbed shoulders with in the past, or that I've, you know, been able to talk to or get an insight on what their routine looks like, it's the same thing, right? It's like, how do I get rid of all the things that I would have to think about that requires me to think about something that I should already know, that I should have already taken prep to do? And that's when you see things that kind of get bloated because of the hustle culture a little bit, but there's still really good principles when you look at them and you're trying to fine tune it, like whatever, journaling or writing down your plans the night before, or, you know, hey, this is something I do every day. What's a tool for that? Or what's a system that I can get by doing that? You know, it's the same reason why for myself doing the consulting, running my own business now, of why I eventually just like invested in having like a virtual assistant. It's the same idea. I felt like, okay, holy cow, yeah, I could email these clients back all the time and I could figure out my schedule and schedule times in with them. Or I could get time back, because how much time is wasted with me doing that when what's actually bringing in the money? It's not talking to the client, it's actually doing the work for them. So how do I put myself in a place to just do the Salesforce work and crank that out? And all the other things, how do I have someone else do that for me? How can I train them up on that? And Notion for me so far is kind of been that. You know, I have my own little template for my virtual assistant, and I have like almost like a place that she can go for access to anything. It has another section for how-to videos. So like anything that I tell her to do, if she doesn't know how to do it, she could go watch a Loom video that's linked in there. So it's an amazing, amazing tool, like you said. So I guess anybody listening, if you haven't had the chance to just get on Notion in general, please sign up for that. Because like Cobey said, like awesome free tier, and has a ton of things you can just do with it that way. And then I think you'll quickly realize like, oh man, yeah, I wish I had something for Salesforce specifically. And then that's like where that's unbeatable. It's like, okay, might as well like pay for this and have it. Like you said, like pay yourself, try to duplicate this. Sure, be my guest, because this is going to take you forever to try to do something like that, right? So awesome product to be able to kind of take a look at that and introduce to our community over here. I know Garen had to jump. He had a few questions. One of the questions that he specifically was talking to me about earlier that I didn't really have an answer for him on was, I think you mainly hit him, but I'll just kind of resurface that. It was just, you said it in your last little tidbit there. It's like, his question was really like, how do we like store all this stuff? How do you know where all these things are? How do you remember all this? And I think my original answer to him when he first started was like, it wasn't a good one. It was just like I've been doing this long enough that I kind of just know these are the places I got to go. But to your point, again, having it all into this quote unquote second brain where you can just have it stored and you're not thinking about it. And it's just a better place that you can go and be like, okay, yep, whatever it is, I know it's going to be over in this Notion template, whether that's notes that I have, client details I need, a website I thought was awesome. It had some solutions for me, content information I need to go to. So I just want to resurface that to kind of answer that question for them. Outside of that, I guess when you first started this, because it's been over 4 years for you, obviously, what was like your main first goal? I mean, did it start with just like taking notes and then you're like, I can make this a little better, and then it just like grew and grew and grew? Or how did you first start with it?
Yeah, so it originally for me started with notes, right? So I've been an avid like OneNote sort of productivity individual for many years. I was through college, I was in the military and all this. It's just, I always needed a place to be able to store my information. But the problem was I was running into like that black hole of notes. I was always writing the same information down because I could never find it. And then Notion became that. But to be frank, like I only used it for a week or two. I was sort of in the early adoption phase. Whenever then I was approached, by my chief revenue officer at the time, who was like, we need a place to store and track all of our software information. Because I was the product owner for 11 different solutions in our technology stack at the time. So Salesforce is one of those, Gainsight, Terminus, like all of the things that you would have in your typical revenue operation stack. And so we needed to track things like license counts, costs, invoices, budgets, etc. And so my first true Notion template was a software management system. And that's really whenever I was like, okay, like I can use this for many other things. And that's when I started really building it out for my own productivity.
Okay, that's legit. And like you said, again, kind of same idea where it's just like having that all stored in one spot. Cool that you grew it from there. What I want to kind of hone in on with the time that we have left is we obviously reviewed how awesome it was, all the features you would get by purchasing it, and how it would obviously make your life a lot easier as an admin or whatever role you fall into, to be honest. To make it a little more simplified though, I could see somebody asking this question afterwards. So I'm going to try to ask it now, which is, okay, that looked cool. It looked like there's a lot of awesome stuff. If I'm brand new, or even myself, if I go and purchase this, what's like step one? Like, okay, I go to your website, I purchase, great, I have it. What do I do from here? Do you have like a recommended kind of like user flow, what you would say to somebody that does buy it? Like step one, this is what I would do. I'd start using this and then grow into like maybe this next and then this next. Is there something like that you would recommend?
Yeah, whenever you purchase the template, it'll actually take you to a page that shows you how to duplicate it into your workspace and stuff. And I have a pretty detailed video that walks through the whole template in much more detail than we went through today to teach you sort of the overall methodology behind it and whatnot. But reality, just start using it. Start creating resource notes. Start, if you have a project that you're working on or something like that, create a project for it. You're not going to destroy or ruin anything, and Notion is very moldable. And I'm always here to answer questions if anybody gets stuck, right? But the reality is to start using it. I recommend, if you are working on a certification, that's probably the best place to start. Start with the certifications parts of it, because that's really where the value is going to come in early on.
Yeah, and with your certification, I just remembered that piece. We talked about that at the beginning. You had like some images in there as well, adding to it. Obviously, sky's the limit of probably how you want to take notes. What did you feel like was the biggest driver to success of using Notion and taking notes in there versus going to something like focus on force and just like reading through their guide that they already have? What's the difference between those, and why would you recommend yours?
Yeah, so I don't provide certification notes, right? So I really want to be clear on that. Focus on Force is a great place to start. What I provide is a way to get that information there, sort of mold it into an ability, in your own way, and I would say how you learn, and then have a place to reference that material long term, right? So moving it into your second brain. The methodology of learning, though, the one that I've sort of adopted over time, is that I tend to summarize things at a high enough level that I can really understand what the specific topic is and whatnot. And I don't take notes on things I already know, right? There's no point in it. When you're done with a specific section of notes, I then go back and do a distillation effort. I summarize it. I try to, what is the key takeaway here? And then I think what I call the majoring in the major and not majoring in the minor, where people tend to focus on the details that don't really matter. It's like, what fundamental Salesforce protocols do I think really need to take away here, right? Service Cloud is a collection of objects related to customer support. Think about it in the most basic sense, because you can always research the details later.
Okay, solid advice. I also like the idea that for myself, like I'm a really visual learner. So I remember, when you go through like certifications, a lot of it for me was like writing it down by hand, like in a notebook. Okay, probably don't even know where that notebook is later on in life, so I can't really review it. And then two, I guess I could draw pictures on my own, but it was a lot easier if I could have just like screenshotted things and stored it somewhere.
Yeah.
So I also loved that idea. I know you didn't specifically have like those screenshots, but I saw some like images or at least icon stuff that you had in there.
Yeah,
So
I
idea.
can show you. So the really great thing is that you have the ability to store a variety of different files, copy and paste in images and whatnot. And so I take a lot of images on things like again, like high level. I can see this image and I know exactly what it's talking about. I can also do things. I love entity relationship diagrams, and you can sort of, if they already provide it, you might as well screenshot it, because it's a very easy way to get a high level understanding as to the object model and sort of how things relate to each other, right?
Yeah.
So I don't need to take notes on ERDs. I just, I take a screenshot of it, I throw it in there, and then usually like I'll break it out, as you can see here. It's sort of on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, it's the breakdown details of what those objects actually do.
Yeah, that's legit. And color coding is another one I'm just like looking at right now. It's like color coding it, make it kind of stand out a different way in your mind. I think is super awesome, especially if you're a visual learner. And then not to mention just probably like time that it would take you to actually write stuff down, or however else you're taking notes, versus doing something like this, right? Like, because you can easily change the color, you can easily type something out, type way faster than you can write. So I think those are all huge advantages too.
Yeah, and then there's also like toggles, right? So if there's a lot of information that I, for example, I don't really need to know all the details, but if I do want to look at the details, I can then toggle it out and sort of look, okay, there's a pain point here for pre-award phases. Here's the pain points for these particular individuals.
Yeah.
And what's really good about this too is if you build up a recall practice, essentially like going back and trying to remember certain things about things that you studied yesterday, is you can actually put a lot of information in toggles. And so maybe I want to be like, okay, what was the plan for the pre-award phase, and think about it and then test myself on it. Like these are sort of like that flashcard mentality. I do this a lot in my notes. I do that a whole lot.
Yeah, you could almost bake in like your own idea of like a Quizlet to be able to use that kind of flashcard idea, like you just mentioned.
Exactly.
Yeah, sweet. Okay, legit. Awesome. I think that answers my question that I was going to try to get ahead of. I linked in here in our chat as well, obviously a place to like go. I'll make sure that we get that into our YouTube channel, social media when we push it out too for you. I think the very last question is just like in general, how would you say that like the Notion template that you have now, like what I guess what I'm trying to get at is like, what would be the advice for somebody in our group here? They're brand new, they're switching over, they're in a different industry right now. What is like the key takeaway of as to why this is going to save them time in your opinion?
Yeah, so it's really establishing a practice of removing barriers to start something, right? taking notes. A lot of people don't take notes because they don't have a practice of where to take notes, how to take notes, where to store notes. And it's the ability to be very detailed with little effort. Once you really adopt a tool of this nature, essentially a framework of how to work, once you really adopt a framework, you'll find that you're significantly more prepared than most individuals. And I've got a lot of compliments over the course of my career from especially now, when other people at my level, when they see how I do, how I work, I'm always, I can refer to specific aspects of a statement of work, or I can refer back to the very specifics. And it's just because I have a good note-taking practice. And that's really what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that piece of it at the end. I think that's a good one to end on, is not necessarily like trying to always just keep it in your brain. You mentioned that earlier, but not trying to keep it in your brain, and how easy it is. I like how you had that contrast where it's just, in most cases like that, right? Where somebody seems like really on it, someone seems really good at their craft. It usually boils down to a really easy fundamental. Like, someone's really good at a sport. What's the difference? They probably put in more time to practice than you do, right? They're more committed to it. They put in more hours. They spend longer time at the gym. That's what they do. The difference, it's not a huge thing. It's those small gains over time that add up to make them a greater player than the other person. I think the same thing that you're trying to point out here, which is whatever role I'm in Salesforce or in business in general, it's the same idea. Like, yeah, of course, I'm not going to remember every single detail they have, but if I have a system to be able to record calls and place them in this place, or to take quick notes and place it in there, or when I'm studying for a cert, or whatever it is, specifics about what it is that I'm doing, and I have that system and you don't, well, obviously I'm going to get better than you. I always have a place to reference it. I know where it's at. I'm remembering it better. I'm kind of ingraining that into my brain better because I'm writing it down afterwards versus just going to a meeting and forgetting about it, or talking with a client, forgetting about it. So I think that's a really good one to end on right there. It's like what you said. It's like, it's the small things that kind of add up to make you the better person. So really good advice there.
Yeah. And the big thing too, is it just becomes more powerful over time, because you get more information in there. Your second brain becomes more valuable over time the more you use it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it just continues to compound, right? Like, again, looking at what you have in there right now looks insane, but it's like, in your perspective, it's like, yeah, I've also been doing this for 4 years and like tweaking it and making it better. And I'm sure your own personal one is awesome to see, because it's just been this accumulation of like everything you've done and what you think is important to keep on to over those years, right? So I think that's an awesome point too. Anything else you'd like to add before we end the session tonight?
No, I just think that it's, anybody right now that's joining the Salesforce ecosystem, like, it's a great time. Don't be scared. The economy will boom back, right? And it's one of the most powerful places to be, is that intersect of technology and business. And it's absolutely got a bright future. So have fun with the ride.
Yeah, love that advice. And it's always great hearing that from somebody else other than just myself. I think that strikes a lot of confidence in people, and just another perspective too, right? Like, it's not just one person coming out here and trying to sell them on it. Always nice to hear something like that. So I do appreciate it.